Today, we're trying out a high-quality and more focused trivia compilation, a fully mixed down, full hour of the best Mario-related cut content and unused ideas from the main Did You Know Gaming channel. Let us know if you liked this more heavily edited approach, and if you do, give it a like and subscribe for more. But for now, let's just get to the trivia.
Did you know? Super Mario Strikers has an unused promotional poster that was made to potentially advertise the game. The ad was ultimately rejected, likely due to its visual similarity to male reproductive organs. In the image, 2 soccer balls dangle from a net bag, with the quote, "You're gonna need a pair." The Mario series has seen several plans that didn't pan out as intended. The idea for Super Mario Maker was actually patented in 1994. The game was planned to use a keyboard and mouse, as well as controllers, and Nintendo even proposed an online system so that players could share their creations. Another idea that didn't pan out as expected has to do with Super Mario 3D Land. According to director Koichi Hayashida, Cape Mario was originally considered as a power-up for the game. However, the cape was ultimately put aside in favor of Tanuki Mario, which had a similar function. Interestingly, in an early prototype stage of Super Mario 3D Land's production, the game's developers used the Mario 64-level Whomp's Fortress to test the game. The level was even shown off by Koichi Hayashida at a Game Developers Conference 2012 panel.
In Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle, Rabbid Princess Peach originally had an animation inspired by Sailor Moon. While the sequence was cut from the game, director Davide Soliani jokingly stated that the test sequence was made by animators who started to go stir-crazy from working so hard. In an interview promoting Super Nintendo Classic Edition, artist Shigefumi Hino confirmed that Mario is hitting Yoshi to make him spit out his tongue in Mario World. Hino said, "Actually, we did the animation with the idea that Mario was hitting Yoshi on the head and Yoshi is sticking out his tongue in surprise. There's even a bonk sound. But we thought people would feel sorry for Yoshi, so we decided to pass it off as Mario saying, 'Go.'" The book, The Art of Super Mario Odyssey, reveals that Rosalina was going to appear in the game as a non-playable character at some point. The book also reveals several unused outfits for Mario, such as a green Sprixie princess from Super Mario 3D World, a Toadette costume, a costume of a Luma from Super Mario Galaxy, and a costume of Mario in a Japanese schoolgirl outfit. Another game that showed Mario in a unique outfit is Sega's Alex Kidd in Shinobi World, or at least the game's beta build did. During the development of Shinobi World, the first boss, Kabuto, was planned to be a parody of Mario. He would have had a moustache, and his name was Mari-O, a play on words that actually means King Mari. This reference was dropped in the final release due to the possible copyright concerns. The secret still remains in some form, however, as Kabuto shoots fireballs and shrinks when the player has inflicted enough damage to him, just like Mario.
Despite all the delays, Mario 64 actually had the quickest development cycle of any game in the series. Assistant director Yoshiaki Koizumi made nearly 250 different Mario animations, about 50 of which got cut, including a somersault that probably broke Mario's fall after a long drop. A few animations didn't get cut, but ended up virtually useless, like the crouching trip kick, which Koizumi says he made for beating specific enemies that never got programmed into the game. To test out different camera systems, developers ran experiments like creating a mountain and having Mario and Mips race to the summit, then switching the camera and going again. They tested out thousands of different camera systems, having it locked, having it move, having it so the player controlled it entirely, and so on. There was one programmer whose whole job was just working on the camera system, and one day he finally came up with a camera Miyamoto was happy with. But it wasn't long before a Nintendo lawyer ran upstairs and told them Sega had a patent for switching cameras, which sent shockwaves through the entire office. They investigated what sort of legal consequences they might face by using Sega's patent, but ultimately decided to throw caution to the wind and use it anyway, praying they wouldn't get sued, and they never did. When it came time to build a Mushroom Kingdom, stages were designed on a fixed path with a flagpole at the end, just like classic 2D Mario stages. But the team decided it'd be more fun if players could wander around freely, like Miyamoto's hamster exploring his room, so they replaced the flagpoles with a series of stars. This also Mario freed up cartridge space and reduced the level design workload. The designers didn't use blueprints when making levels, instead adding and subtracting from levels until they felt right. The first stage made was Bob Battlefield, which originally had a river running through it. But when the team playtested it, they realized that the river's current was too strong and could be frustrating, so they drained all the water and left a dry valley in its place. Programmer Hajime Yajima wanted stages to have destructible terrain, which the game would remember. One example he gave was the player destroying a block, and the game remembering the block was gone for the entire playthrough. A couple months later, co-director Takashi Tezuka told Nintendo Power they'd already made 32 stages, and the final game might even have 40, plus bonus areas like the Princess's Secret Slide. However, the stage count ended up being scaled back, and the final game only had 15 stages. Mario was the first game developed for the N64, so the team hadn't figured out how to take full advantage of the technology. Ultimately, lots of content was cut, including 3 separate modes incorporating Luigi. One was a split-screen mode where Mario and Luigi started on opposite ends of the castle and ended up meeting in the middle. Another mode was more like a traditional co-op, with the camera pulling back to fit both players on one screen. Earlier versions of the game were even called Ultra 64 Mario Brothers, referencing Luigi's inclusion and the N64's original name, the Ultra 64. Due to programming difficulties, Luigi got cut just months before Mario 64 hit store shelves. The team tried to make up for it by adding a Mario Bros style minigame with Luigi, but this was cut as the N64 was only bundled with one controller, making multiplayer a rarity for most players at launch.
Did you know? Super Mario Odyssey isn't the first 3D Mario game planned to have realistic proportioned humans. Real humans were planned to appear in Sunshine, which can be seen with a brown-haired girl from early footage of the game. Sunshine may have been planned to include multiplayer as well. The game has an unused camera function labeled SMSIS multiplayer map that zooms in and out to keep multiple characters in view. If this function is activated while both Mario and Shadow Mario are on screen, the camera will automatically zoom to keep both characters in sight. The Japanese version of the game also has files that mention an unused Isle Delfino train system. These files contain dialogue for buying tickets and getting them stamped, as well as a list of train stations on the island. Using the train also seemed like the primary method of accessing a level. Sunshine was even planned to have a form of currency known as Sol Coins, which could have been used to buy items and tickets for the scrap train system. Furthermore, the names of the several unused beta levels exist in the game's code, including the Warship Island, Fire Shrine, Hurdle Rock, and Hotel Okrima, and other assets suggest that Corona Mountain was intended to be a full level, but over time later scaled back. Interestingly, a file relating to Gelato Beach has an obscene name and goes by the title Sand Bomb Bass Shit. Other folders contain lyrics from the songs I Wanna Be Loved By You and Stand By Me as placeholder text. Super Mario Sunshine has at least 3 unused enemies. One foe uses the same animations as Stroll and Stew, and is named Dorokuri in the game's files. As this enemy can steal Mario's hat, its name is most likely a reference to the Japanese word Dorobo, which means thief. There's also another, much larger stew named Hinokuri 2 that seems to be an unused boss. When put into the game via hacking, it'll spawn other stews while walking around. In order to defeat Hinokuri 2, the player has to spray water into the body to destroy its shell before stomping on its exposed eye. A 2D drawing of a Goomba named Cug is listed as a test enemy in the game's data. Cug actually exists in the game itself, located under Pinna Park. That said, it was never intended to be seen, but can be viewable by glitching the camera through the ground. Every area in the game has an image file that determines the distribution of goop within that level. For levels that don't contain any goop, the developers filled the unused images with notes and doodles, including a sketch of Cug. Several of the game's areas also have unused music. When Mario rides Yoshi, drums will be played to the beat of the song. Since Yoshi is absent from Noki Bay, the casino mission of Hotel Delfino, or any other secret courses, the Yoshi arrangements go unused. Another unused idea was having Flood use a gun-like nozzle for shooting enemies. The team cut this early on, fearing that the gun-like item would receive backlash in the United States.
The Galaxy 2 team experimented with a system that could change the entire game world, similar to the 3-day system in Majora's Mask. The idea proved to be too ambitious and was scrapped early on. However, the team still paid homage to Majora's Mask with the Rock Mushroom power-up. One of Galaxy 2's directors, Yoshiaki Koizumi, was adamant about Rock Mario's inclusion. He'd previously worked on Majora's Mask and designed the controls for Goron Link. Influences from the Zelda series can also be found in the original Mario Galaxy. Mega Leg was inspired by an unused boss battle from Ocarina of Time. Ganondorf was planned to transform into a colossal beast that Link needed to climb in order to attack. It was scrapped due to hardware concerns, and because players wouldn't be able to see Ganon's entire model on the screen. Yoshi was originally intended to accompany Mario in the first Mario Galaxy. In an Iwata Asks interview, lead programmer Takeshi Hayakawa remarked, "Well, if you're gonna put Yoshi in a game, he has to be a main element. But the previous game had spherical landforms and gravity shifts and lots of elements that were entirely new. If we'd thrown in Yoshi too, it would have been too much all at once." This wasn't the only rejected concept brought back for Galaxy 2. Starship Mario was also planned to appear in the first game, though perhaps not as a hub. Characters from other Nintendo properties, including Pikmin and Donkey Kong, were planned to make cameo appearances in Galaxy 2. Shigeru Miyamoto, however, shot both ideas down. In particular, he thought the slender Pikmin characters wouldn't fit the game's mechanics. Mario characters are round and squat so that they're easy to jump on, but the Pikmin wouldn't fit this function. A collection of unused insects, fully textured, rigged, and modeled, exist in Mario Galaxy's files. There's also a fully functional landmine that can be set off by touching it or shooting it with a star bit. Unused animations for Mario show that he was planned to throw punches like in Mario 64, and, bizarrely, perform several tennis moves. The official Prima strategy guide for Mario Galaxy featured several pieces of concept art. Early art for Guppy reveals that he was originally going to be one of the dolphins from Super Mario World, and was friendlier towards Mario. He was redesigned as a killer whale to reflect the more wild personality the developers gave him. Early concepts for Rosalina were also included in the guide, showing that she initially had a closer design to Princess Peach and was actually intended to be related to Peach. Rosalina's hair was also originally in a beehive hairstyle instead of being let down and covering one eye. The final hairstyle was chosen to reflect her outward strength and inner loneliness. The floating fortress was designed extremely early during development. Designing the planetoid actually helped Nintendo find a direction for the game, and cemented the idea that Super Mario Galaxy would be the next Mario title. Comparing the concept art in the guide, it's easy to see how much the level changed over time.
Another interesting fact is that, at one point, Koizumi suggested he wanted the storybook to be sold as an actual children's book. Another thing that developed over time is Rosalina's appearance. We already covered some changes to Rosalina's design in an earlier video, but new information has come to light. Originally, Rosalina wasn't always going to dwarf Mario in size. When Nintendo EAD manager Hideki Kono saw Rosalina, he felt she should be taller. Speaking to Nintendo Dream, Kono recounted the experience, saying, "When Mario Galaxy was in production, I offered my advice. I wanted to include Rosalina in Mario Kart, but her body type was very similar to other characters. So I asked them if they could make her a bit taller. I told them, after all, Nintendo might use Rosalina in other games in the future. Partly because of her height, Rosalina would become a heavyweight class racer when she debuted in Mario Kart Wii, separating her from the other characters and becoming the only female racer in that weight class in the game. Within the E3 demo of Super Mario Galaxy, there are a number of differences from the final game. The Wii remote originally had more functionality, being able to swipe away projectiles such as the fireballs that King Caliente shoots out. King Caliente's boss fight was reworked considerably, with the final game being a lot easier than the demo. In fact, when Mario Galaxy first began development, the team experimented with using more motion and pointer controls to move Mario. However, they felt like it wouldn't be a Mario game if you're not controlling Mario moving around. So they went back to a more standard control scheme. Another difference in the game was the music that plays when Mario collects a Power Star. Originally, the game played an orchestrated rendition of the flagpole theme from Super Mario Bros. In the original Galaxy, there's an unused mushroom file. Bizarrely, removing the file will cause the game to crash instantly upon loading. This is because even though the file is technically unused, the game still checks for it.
Did you know? Mario Kart's original prototype featured a generic man in a big helmet and overalls who would drive around with only an oil can and a banana. The game's producer, Shigeru Miyamoto, didn't think the game looked very unique, and he told the designers to, quote, use the banana. This advice led to the team thinking about Donkey Kong, which ultimately resulted in the inclusion of Mario characters. Although the battle mode has been noticeably subpar in recent games, Nintendo actually spent more time making Super Mario Kart's battle mode than they did the racing mode. In fact, the lack of racing is what drew the team to the battle mode, as it was an entirely new approach to karting. The original battle mode was completed early in development, but this wasn't the battle mode seen in the final game. The original mode had no obstacles on the course, and players would fire circular projectiles at one another in a machine gun-like fashion. However, the lack of obstacles made it so players would get dizzy circling one another, so obstacles and other landmarks were added to make the mode less disorienting. The series also has a lot of unused features. Later builds of Super Mario Kart featured victory animations that went unused in the final game. If the player finishes a Grand Prix in second place, a Super Koopa will fly overhead in a loop before getting hit by the cork of a champagne bottle. And if the player finishes in third, 4 paratroopas would fly past with the last one getting hit by the cork. The ROM from Mario Kart GP contains 3 unused images: a multicolored block, a picture of mascots from Expo 2005 in Aichi, Japan, and bizarrely, a photo of the 2004 Beslan school hostage crisis where over 1,100 people were taken hostage.
Later in development, a newer prototype of Mario Kart 64 was shown off at Nintendo Space World 1995 in Japan. At this stage of development, the game was called Super Mario Kart R, with the R standing for rendered, as in rendered graphics. The prototype featured a number of differences compared to Mario Kart 64, and even had some music that was never used in the final game, which is what you're hearing right now. Super Mario Kart R also included Kamek the Magikoopa as one of its 8 races. Kamek was the primary antagonist in Yoshi's Island, the hugely popular follow-up to Super Mario World that launched just a few months prior to Space World, so it made perfect sense for Kamek to appear alongside Bowser and Wario as the game's villains. But one kidnapper ended up getting replaced with another. Kamek was replaced in the final game with Donkey Kong, the vengeful gorilla that kidnapped Mario's girlfriend. Super Mario Kart R also made use of the feather from the original Super Mario Kart on Super Nintendo. After getting cut during development, the feather didn't reappear in the series until Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, 20 years later. In addition to multiplayer horizontal split screen, the prototype also allowed for vertical split screen. This option was also cut during development, but it's still hidden inside Mario 64's internal data. You can even unlock it and take it for a spin with a Game Shark and this cheat code. The development process was long and arduous, and the developers even suffered a hard disk crash at one point, erasing some of their work. But according to character designer Tomoaki Kuroumi, the crash was actually a blessing in disguise. The models on the character select screen were originally static, unable to move or blink, but the crash deleted all those models with no hope of recovery. So the developers had to make brand new models, this time giving them animations, an extra layer of polish that wasn't originally supposed to be in the game. Longtime Mario voice actor Charles Martinet took over all 3 roles, but the original Japanese recordings did end up getting recycled for both the Japanese and international versions of Mario Kart Super Circuit, as well as Mario Party 1 and 2. When Charles Martinet re-recorded the voices for Mario Kart 64, Wario was rebranded as an Italian rather than a German. We asked Charles if he knew anything about Wario originally being German, if maybe it was his decision to change the accent, just like he switched Mario's accent from Brooklyn to Italian a couple of years earlier. Charles said he'd never even heard about Wario being German, so it sounds like the switch to Italian was probably the result of an oversight by the localization team. They gave Charles the script without any notes about a German accent, so he naturally assumed he'd apply an Italian accent, just as he'd already done for Mario and Luigi. Hidden inside Mario Kart 64's internal data, there's a function that allows you to alter the Y values for every stage. In other words, you can make tracks steeper or flatter by just a little bit, or by a huge amount, including all the slopes, walls, and ramps. You can even invert tracks, so you're essentially racing on them upside down. It's possible the developers created this mechanic just for testing and debugging purposes, but considering the fact it's right next to the flag for mirror mode in the game's memory, the developers may have intended scaling mode as an unlockable extra. Regardless of their intent, the mechanic is still hidden inside the game, and you can try it out for yourself with some Game Shark codes we've added to this video's description. There was also a no item mode scrapped during development. In an attempt to appeal to F-Zero fans, racers were given the option to play without items, allowing for more serious competition where karts clumped together in the final lap, edging each other out for fractions of a second. But focus groups much preferred the game with items, so developers just cut the no item mode completely. According to Tadashi Sugiyama, who designed most of Mario Kart 64's stages, there were also some racetracks that were cut during development. One was a large multi-story parking garage, where you'd start at the bottom floor and race up to the top. essentially racing in circles but in an upward trajectory. This was Tadashi's idea for a more realistic location, but all the constant turning made some people feel sick, so they cut it. There was also a track that took place in a huge city with a pond and even a castle, where players raced around different kinds of houses and buildings. But Tadashi says the stage took too long to race through, so the city was scrapped too. The version of the game shown at Space World featured a new character to the sub-series, Donkey Kong. DK's inclusion didn't expand the game's roster, however, he simply replaced a character from an earlier build of the game, Kamek. We saw him in an issue of Nintendo Power and in a bit of footage, but the reason for Kamek's removal has always been a bit of a mystery to the West. In this issue of Famimaga 64, however, the interviewer got an answer directly from Miyamoto on why Kamek lost out to DK. According to Miyamoto, we had Kamek in, but he looked off and too ordinary, so we changed it. We want to use highly distinctive characters. So, mystery solved. It seems DK's distinctive size and fur-covered physique is what secured his inclusion in Mario Kart. Let's move on to an interview from December 2003's issue of Nintendo Dream magazine. The interview does focus on Double Dash, but the devs had a couple of Mario Kart 64 tidbits we set aside for this video. Halfway into the interview, the devs start talking smack about the Chain Chomp item, saying it's annoying, but only when someone else has it. Whichever dev holds the leash will sing its praises. All the banter seems to jog Double Dash director Kiyoshi Mizuki's memory, who reveals the team seriously considered having Chain Chomp items in Mario Kart 64. Mizuki said, "We'd actually talked about including Chain Chomp since the N64, and so put him in this time as a test. Before we made the adjustments, everyone was very happy with him. MK64 did have chomps, but they're only on Rainbow Road, and they are stage hazards, not items. The devs don't say why chomps weren't items on the N64, but seeing as how almost every 64 dev story is about tackling restrictions, it seems technical limitations likely kept chomps from leaving Rainbow Road." Later in the interview, the interviewer mentions how great it is to replay footage using Double Dash's new replay feature. Then Sugiyama brings up some interesting MK64 history, saying, "That was another thing we wanted to do on N64, but couldn't. This was partly due to that awkwardness of 2D sprites on sloped terrain we mentioned. But Takahashi says that the limited angles the characters could be displayed in also played a role. So basically, the replay feature was held back until the team could make a fully 3D Mario Kart and avoid cumbersome visuals." Jumping to another edition of Nintendo Dream, back when it was called 64 Dream, their October 97 issue has an interesting blurb on Mario Kart 64 in response to a reader's question. In July 97, Nintendo re-released a special edition of Super Mario 64 exclusively in Japan. This was called the Shindo Pack Taiyo version, which notably made Mario 64 compatible with the N64 Rumble Pack. And with this in mind, one of 64 Dream's readers was curious if Mario Kart 64 would get the same treatment. Nintendo's head of PR, Yoshio Hongo, gave a bit of a surprising response, saying, "In-house, we've already created a version compatible with Rumble. Technically speaking, making it compatible with vibration packs is a simple process, but I don't know whether it will be reprinted or not. Mario Kart 64 is by far the best-selling N64 software, and it's unclear whether it would be a good idea to make it compatible with vibration packs. We guess the Rumble-enabled version of Mario Kart 64 will just have to live on in our dreams." Another interview we had translated comes from the August 2001 issue of Nintendo Online Magazine. This one's all about Mario Kart Super Circuit. When the team began testing their ideas, they started porting over Super Mario Kart from the SNES and incorporated some elements from Mario Kart 64. Things developed quickly from here. Kenji Matsumoto mentions how time-consuming it was to make tracks early on, with the team barely scraping 3 courses together for Space World 2000. But it seems scarcity turned into surplus, with Matsumoto saying that after Space World, "We created a tool that made things faster. We actually made a lot of other courses that didn't make it into the final product." Then Kimura chimes in, revealing something pretty interesting. "At first we had courses under the sea as well, but Miyamoto said no to them. He said karts don't work underwater." Despite Miyamoto's initial resistance to underwater karting, the series would eventually embrace the idea a decade later in Mario Kart 7. While multiplayer in Super Mario Kart and Mario Kart 64 used split-screen multiplayer, on GBA, everyone would have their own screen. In Super and 64, you could see what items people had, resulting in, as Takeshi Ando puts it, pressure and bargaining amongst combatants. At one point, the team wanted to maintain this aspect of multiplayer, and even tried squeezing all 4 players' point of view onto the Game Boy Advance screen. The GBA's resolution is only 240 by 160 pixels, so each player's chunk of the screen would render gameplay with just 120 by 80 pixels. That's half as many pixels as an OG Game Boy game, which sounds horrible and is probably why the idea was dropped.
Did you know? Sonic the Hedgehog was once teased as a playable character in Double Dash. In February 2002, Shigeru Miyamoto did a short interview with Ananova.com about the state of the GameCube sales numbers and the upcoming Mario Kart game. His final comment was, "We're having a series of meetings about Mario Kart for GameCube, and we've come to the point where we'll be making some drastic changes compared to the last games. Sonic the Hedgehog might be one of the drivers." Unsurprisingly, this sparked rumors that Sonic would be a playable character in the game. When Double Dash was first shown off, however, Sonic was nowhere to be seen, and the rumor died down. The rumor resurfaced in October 2003 when screenshots leaked showing the game had unlockable characters, but when Double Dash finally came out, Sonic wasn't in the game's roster. As you may already know, Double Dash allowed for up to 16-player local multiplayer over a LAN connection, but Nintendo experimented with other kinds of connectivity as well, such as the Game Boy Advance link cable. Nintendo have yet to elaborate what these experiments entailed, but it's speculated this feature may have interacted with Mario Kart Super Circuit. Nintendo also experimented with online connectivity, allowing players to go head-to-head across an internet connection. However, the team at EAD believed Double Dash's frantic gameplay needed a response time faster than what current internet connections could provide. Nintendo's Shinya Takahashi even said, "No company, including Nintendo, could make a perfect version of Double Dash's gameplay in an online version. We have reached a high level in terms of the head-to-head mode, and those kinds of interesting features could never be reproduced if they were put online." This wasn't the only feature cut from Double Dash. One odd mechanic the developers experimented with was a double jump. In a Japanese interview for Nintendo's own website, design manager Tsuyoshi Watanabe said, "It's quite sad, but we had to scrap a lot of different mechanics. Personally, I really wanted to add a double jump. In the end, even though I wanted to create something new that really broke from the past, I wanted to add things that would fit." Another cut feature is Donkey Kong's original special item. DK's special item in the final game is the Jumbo Banana, but the developers originally planned for DK to use a barrel. This would have been a throwback to the original Donkey Kong arcade game, but the team thought it didn't work as well as they'd hoped, and opted for the Jumbo Banana instead. Several stages were also cut from the game. The developers originally made more than just 16 courses, but deliberately removed several to make sure every stage was truly unique. The team saw other racing games that boasted large amounts of courses, but the courses would be hard to tell apart due to similar backgrounds or course layouts, and EAD didn't want to make the same mistake. Some battle stages were also removed. Within the data of the game, the battle stages are titled Mini, followed by a number. These numbers range from 1 to 8, meaning there were originally going to be 8 stages, but in the final game there were only 6, with the stages Mini 4 and Mini 6 being absent. There's also evidence that an entire mode was cut from the game. Within the game's data, there's references to a reverse cup, which would see players race the game's tracks backwards. This would be different to mirror mode, which inverses the courses horizontally. Menu assets referencing the reverse cup can be found in the data, as well as fully modeled reverse cup trophies for first, second, and third place. There's a few more interesting details in the game's data. In the file mram.arc, the Spiny Shells file name is item Cora Yellow. This indicates that Spiny Shells, known as blue shells by fans, were planned to be yellow at some point. An earlier demo version of Double Dash also has several assets that went unused in the final game, including some hidden ending graphics that say exciting ending and peace. Some unused content can be seen in early screenshots as well. An early build of Waluigi Stadium featured duplicate Marios, Luigis, Warios, and Waluigis in the audience. This audience was likely just a placeholder and was changed in the final game to minor characters who could be repeated over and over without breaking the player's immersion.
This next interview is from a different issue of Nintendo Dream we had translated with a ton of developer insights. It features key players from Nintendo EAD, the development division that made the game, including Double Dash Chief Director Kiyoshi Mizuki and 2 of its producers, Shinya Takahashi and Tadashi Sugiyama. According to Takahashi, Mario Kart is more of a party game than a racer, so the team started thinking of elements that'd get players more involved with each other. The concept of 2 players in one kart emerged, but experimenting with the core mechanics of such a huge IP came with a lot of pressure. Mario Kart's always been a reliable system seller for Nintendo, and messing with success could irreparably damage the brand and the GameCube itself, so failure was not an option. The possibility of 2-seater karts ruining the game instead of evolving it terrified them, so much so they actually developed a whole single kart version of Double Dash alongside the double kart version. They thought of it like an insurance policy, so if tandem karts sucked or fans hated it, they could quickly backpedal to a more traditional Mario Kart experience. The single kart build was worked on all the way up to the final year before launch. It sounds like the reason it took them so long to gain confidence in double karts is because they were initially going to have both drivers side by side, kind of like motorcycles with sidecars. But they realized 8 double-wide karts on one track wasn't going to work all too well, with everyone bouncing off each other and disrupting the game flow due to the sheer width of the vehicles. After trying out a few different setups, they arrived at how karts look in the release version, one driver in front of the other. But that gave them a whole new problem. The guy in the back blocking the view of the guy in the front. After using sprite-based karts in the first 3 games, this was Nintendo's first stab at a fully 3D Mario Kart, and they'd taken great efforts squeezing as much detail as they could into every character, so they wanted to make sure we could see them. The fix they came up with was letting racers swap seats on the fly. Double Dash was pretty rigid at this stage of development. Characters like Mario and Luigi were forcibly bundled together as a team, and you couldn't mix and match other drivers. Director Mizuki said they'd initially considered forcing characters to switch seats every lap. Quote, "At first we had an idea of forcing a swap after each lap, but if we did that, it wouldn't be possible for kids and parents to play together. But we want small kids' grandpas and grandmas to play Mario Kart, which was a thought point of our decision making." They also say Mario and Luigi's fireballs were inspired by a scrapped item that launched a scattering of 5 shells. The team tried it out, but there were way too many shells on screen, and it became a problem. It started out being a single fireball the brothers could launch. Mizuki said, "At first it was one fireball, but no matter what we did, it wasn't strong enough, even when we tried making it explode or burn." But they thought back to their unused 5 shells item and gave fireballs the same number and spread, and it fit great. Before coming up with the special heart item for Peach and Daisy, the team didn't know what to give them. The devs briefly considered giving the duo, quote, umbrellas or something, for defense or to float down from heights, but they thought that'd be kinda useless and probably just slow them down. Originally, the team wanted to include Donkey Kong Jr., and they even made a character model for him. But ultimately, due to Diddy Kong being more popular, Diddy was chosen for the game. Diddy's model shares the same origins as his model in Mario Golf Toadstool Tour, but was tweaked to better fit Double Dash.
Did you know? Professor Egad was originally going to be a playable racer in Mario Kart DS, but was ultimately swapped out for Dry Bones. Egad's model is missing from the game's files, however, with the character using Toad's graphics and audio and hacked back into the game. This could suggest Egad was cut very early in development. This wasn't the game's only big change during production. Arguably Mario Kart DS's most innovative and important feature, online play, wasn't originally planned at all. In fact, it wasn't even considered until about halfway through the game's development. The team at Nintendo EAD believed 8-person local multiplayer would be enough, but when internet play became a possibility, they decided to challenge themselves to include it. To test out online play, developers would race each other from their homes after work. Back then, Mario Kart DS was called Nitro Kart internally, a nod to the DS code name Nitro. This name was never disclosed to the public, but it explains why the game's new courses all take place in the Nitro Grand Prix. Triple bananas were a new item type, but were originally going to be implemented very differently. One idea idea for the bananas was that players would tap the map on the bottom screen, placing a banana wherever they wanted. But the team quickly realized taking focus away from the top screen, where the action was, resulted in muddled and confusing gameplay. Nintendo tried to do a lot more with the bottom screen throughout development, but felt the fast-paced gameplay made managing two screens impractical for players. The game has a lot of unused content from Double Dash within its data, like the blooper graphic, as well as an unused Bowser Shell item graphic, a background tree, and even a whole soundtrack worth of music in the style of Double Dash. Speaking of removed or altered content, Mario Kart DS has an astonishing amount of cut assets, mostly found through data mining the game's 2005 USA kiosk demo and other early builds. In the kiosk demo, practically every course deviates from the final version. Some of the more noteworthy differences can be found in Waluigi Pinball, which might as well be a completely different stage, having no pinballs at all. Another interesting fact about Waluigi Pinball is that the course was originally titled Luigi Course, suggesting Luigi was the focus of the level, not Waluigi. The Luigi's Mansion course holds another difference, where the mansion's paintings shake and stretch out from the wall, just like they do in Mario Kart 7 on 3DS. The Delfino Square stage originally had a Yoshi statue in its center rather than the more appropriate Pianta, and bumping into this course's fruit stands knocks players out of bounds. The early Shroom Ridge stage uses the start flag from Mario Kart 64, and amusingly, the sign that reads Fresh in the final game instead says Flesh here, giving it an entirely different vibe. There's also a few unused courses in the final game's data. Although most of them are clearly test stages or early versions of other courses, some are unique. A beach level titled Noko Noko Course can be found, which means Koopa Troopa Course in Japanese. The level seems to be a mix of Koopa Troopa Beach on N64 and Koopa Beach 1 on SNES. Another scrapped stage is Dokkan Course, which in this context likely means Pipe Course, a fitting name for a course that has several huge pipes in it. There's an unused battle stage in the data that's a remake of Block City from Double Dash. The stage is fairly unfinished, and whether the stage was made specifically for testing isn't clear. A remake of Mario's Circuit from Double Dash can also be found, which lacks polish and is void of obstacles. The level ultimately made it into Mario Kart Wii, which funnily enough lines up with Hideki Kono's statements. Before Mario Kart Wii was even announced, and when the Wii was called Revolution, Kono said, "We're finished with DS development right now and I'm working on Revolution stuff, so hopefully a lot of that cut stuff is going to show up in Revolution games." On top of unused courses, the game also has many unused missions. Across all builds of the game, around 30 unused missions have been found, all with goals comparable to those in the final game. Pre-release versions of Mario Kart DS had most of the final game's items, but notably lacked any fake item boxes. The kiosk version's data does contain an image of a purple Koopa shell, however, as well as depicting a triple purple shell. One of the game's features may point towards an unused promotional contest. Mario Kart Double Dash had a contest in Japan through Club Nintendo, where players would choose any combination of character and kart, then try to get the best times on several courses. They'd then press a specific combination of buttons to bring up a code containing their last time trial runs. The code would then be submitted through Club Nintendo, and the fastest players would be rewarded. For Mario Kart DS, if players press up, down, L, R, Y, A in the time trial records, a similar code will pop up. This might suggest Nintendo was planning a similar contest for the DS game. When Mario Kart Wii first entered development, the devs had a slightly different vision for the game, with many of their ideas being cut. The game is internally named Revo Kart, with Revo being a nod to Revolution, the Wii's original name. Series producer Hideki Kono originally wanted to call it Mario Kart X, with the X signifying a focus on extreme sports. In a 2008 interview, he said, "I love BMX bicycles and snowboarding. When we made Mario Kart DS, we wanted to put in some elements of extreme sports so the players could do some rough riding, but it was difficult to achieve in a handheld game. That's why we decided to make it happen for the Wii." But Mario creator Shigeru Miyamoto flat out rejected the idea of BMX bikes, as he didn't like the idea of Mario riding a bicycle. Motorbikes were introduced instead, and half-pipes were implemented into many of the tracks. Throughout development, the Mario Kart team tested about 30 different wheel prototypes before settling on the Wii wheel we know today. They checked out some real-life go-karts and realized that instead of round steering wheels, most of them were actually square-shaped, so they went with a true-to-life wheel in the shape of a square. But they eventually scrapped the idea and decided a circular wheel would be easier to understand, and after many revisions, reduced its weight so players' arms didn't get tired holding it up during long play sessions. Mario Kart Wii's internal data and pre-release screenshots revealed even more scrapped ideas, including characters, items, and an entire game mode. 2 drivers from Double Dash, Paratroopers and PD Piranha, were included in early builds, but didn't make it to the final cut. Hammer Bros were once planned as a new addition to the roster, but after getting cut from Mario Kart Wii, they didn't make their series debut until 10 years years later in Mario Kart Tour. In addition to all the usual modes like Grand Prix and time trials, Mario Kart DS also introduced a brand new mission mode, where players were offered a variety of challenges like collecting coins, mowing down enemies, and battling bosses like Big Babam. Each mission awarded players with a 1, 2, or 3-star rank based on performance, adding some extra replayability. In 2017, a modder named Mr. Bean 35000 VR discovered an unused mission mode hiding in Mario Kart Wii's internal data, with objectives like collecting item boxes before time runs out, pulling off a string of mini-turbos, drifts, and slipstreams, and fighting bosses. However, it appears mission mode was cut from the game to make room for tournaments, a game mode that unfortunately can't even be played anymore. A total of 48 tournaments were released, like speedrunning a track built on top of N64 Skyscraper, killing a giant Pokey, and racing through some remixed tracks. But unlike mission mode, you could only play 2 tournaments a month, and they were only available during that 10-day window. Mario Kart DS had 63 missions to choose from anytime you wanted, so if mission mode wasn't cut from Mario Kart Wii, it likely would have included even more missions and added hours of rank-based content that could still be accessed right from the startup menu. Mario Kart 8 almost had racetracks where the player could drill their way underground. According to the game's producer, Hideki Kono, in Mario Kart 7 we had the glider and submersion in water, and so when we were thinking about new ideas for 8, we thought, well, since we did all that, why not put a drill on the karts, and have them go through the earth somehow for subterranean racing? He goes on to say they ended up scrapping the idea in favor of making a new anti-gravity gimmick instead. But interestingly, a mining kart called the Drill Master made its way into Mario Kart Arcade GP-DX, which landed in Japanese arcades a few months before Kono's team wrapped up development on Mario Kart 8. Unfortunately though, none of the arcade game's courses were designed around a digging mechanic, and the drill was only for show.
Since the game's release, fans have turned Paper Mario inside out looking for secrets. One such secret was discovered 15 years after the game's release by Strider7X. In the Smash Attack minigame room, 10 Luigis can be found underneath the scene. The game stores objects and characters off-screen when they aren't in use, making it likely that the minigame once featured Luigi. It's speculated that the goal of Smash Attack may have originally been to find 10 Luigis instead of 10 Peach faces. Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door has its fair share of secrets as well. As you may know, the X-Naut Fortress has a changing room that makes Mario and his current partner transform into 8-bit sprites. What you may not know, however, is that Peach was supposed to be able to use the changing room as well. Within the game's files is an unused 8-bit sprite of Peach, likely from a cut scenario in the game. One interesting fact about The Thousand-Year Door is that it was the first Paper Mario game translated in North America. Paper Mario on the N64 was translated into English in Japan, which led to a more basic localization. Translating Thousand-Year Door at the Nintendo Treehouse allowed localizers to do more with the game's writing. That said, some early localization choices were revised in the final release. In an early 2004 demo version of the game, the X-Nauts are called Boomergangers when tattled. No other text related to X-Nauts is present, but this suggests the entire organization was going to be called the Boomer Gang, or at the very least, this title was once considered.
At the game's first meeting, Square presented Nintendo with an image of Mario on horseback, equipped with a sword and cape. It was essentially a fusion of Square's Final Fantasy style and Mario. The illustration didn't sit well with Mario creator Shigeru Miyamoto, who immediately said, "That's not right." Miyamoto and one of Mario RPG's directors, Chihiro Fujioka, went back and forth on the issue. They discussed whether the game should have a classic RPG approach with swords and magic, or if Mario should use his iconic jump attacks and hammer. They couldn't decide between the two, so they let the fans decide. Fujioka told Retro Gamer, "We had to decide on Mario's fighting style. I said, let's just decide his fighting style based on how much the audience applauds." Fujioka commented on both fighting styles, and the audience cheered more for Mario using jumps and hammers. Other drastic changes in direction took place early in production. One example is the pseudo 3D art style, which didn't exist at all near the start of development. Mario RPG initially used a top-down map with a 2D style Mario. The game received a pre-rendered isometric overhaul after some experimentation with 3D. There were also plans to include a shape-shifting boss character in the second half of the game. Code for the villain was even programmed into the game, and several sketches were drawn. Though the boss was cut, the ideas behind it could have influenced the fight against Smithy. Originally, the team team wanted Mario to use devices that would impact devices in other parts of the world, causing a type of domino effect. Chain reaction was a key phrase the team used during development. This eventually led to the game's action events, where light platforming and other real-time set pieces occurred throughout the game. Though production was sometimes difficult, Square and Nintendo worked well together. Ex-Square president Hisashi Suzuki approached Nintendo about making a sequel before Mario RPG was even released. But due to Square leaning away from Nintendo in favor of the PlayStation, a similar collaboration never took place on the Nintendo 64. Luigi was planned to be in the game, as seen in an early issue of Nintendo Power. Many other elements were changed or scrapped during development. Some examples are the Chancellor looking gray and much older, Frog Fuchsia's island being closer to the land and therefore not accessed via Tadpole Bridge, an encounter with Bowser in his keep at an unknown time, an unused underwater battle stage, and a lot of enemies, most of which were reskinned versions of existing foes.
As well as an interesting history, the Mario and Luigi series has a surprising amount of secrets. The backgrounds used during Superstar Saga's battles are all displayed at 240 by 160 pixels. However, the background images themselves are actually 512 by 256 pixels, meaning that less than a third of the full backgrounds are actually seen during gameplay. This also implies the backgrounds were originally planned to move during gameplay for all battles, rather than just the game's final fight and the battle with Trunkel. Also in the code of Superstar Saga is the Game & Watch item. Its exact purpose is unknown, though based on its placement among the game's files, it was most likely planned to be a key item at some point. There are also 8 unused music tracks in Superstar Saga that are arrangements from Alpha Dream's previous title, Tomato Adventure. These were likely used for testing during development. And Geno from Super Mario RPG makes an appearance during the Star Smash minigame, which is notable as the intellectual rights to the character actually belong to Square Enix, not Nintendo. Sadly, Geno's cameo was cut from the 3DS remake of the game Mario & Luigi Superstar Saga plus Bowser's Minions. The game's Starbeans Cafe also has several unused cameos that would originally be triggered with each new drink made in the cafe. The game was planned to have appearances from Wario, Captain Olimar, Samus Aran, Link, the Excitebike Racer, and Fox McCloud, with minor appearances from Peppy and Slippy. The second Mario & Luigi game, Partners in Time, contains an unused bro item called the Spike Shell. This attack was usable in an early playable demo build of the game at E3, and was also shown in promotional material. There's also an unused enemy that appeared in the game's marketing that's called Scoot Bloop in the game's data. When put into the game via hacking, Scoot Bloop only has one attack and crashes the game after its turn is over. Mario & Luigi Bowser's Inside Story contains an unused item named Dummy that appears as a white mushroom covered with red hearts. When used, the item heals Bowser for 60 HP, even if it's used by Mario and Luigi while in Bowser's stomach. Several enemies in the game can normally only be fought as Bowser by himself. However, if the game is hacked, these enemies can be seen using normally unused attacks and behaviors when fighting against Mario and Luigi.
In our search for trivia, we stumbled upon an interview with the developers of Mario & Luigi Bowser's Inside Story. The interview is from the March 2009 issue of Japan's Nintendo Online magazine, which we had translated into English. The team initially envisioned Bowser as one to attack by jumping on his enemies, but they chose to focus on his fire-breathing technique instead, along with regular punching attacks. This was because the team wanted to put emphasis on the dynamism between the King of the Koopas and the Mario Brothers, giving both a distinctly different moveset. Part of the initial proposals for the game was that Bowser would become gigantic, but how this would be visually portrayed within the game was a tough act. One of the original ideas was that rather than making the Bowser sprites become larger, they considered simply shrinking the backgrounds, but they didn't find this option to be particularly impactful. Several interesting elements were cut from the game too. A number of enemies can be found within the game's data which went unused as a result of the overall vibe not fitting within the game's concept of inside Bowser's body. Despite being interesting designs, they simply wouldn't fit with the general concept of the game's plot, so they wound up going unused. One concept that wound up being left completely abandoned relates to how Bowser would have been utilized in gameplay. It was initially conceptualized that Bowser would take on the form of a sort of tank, or Zord for you Power Rangers fans out there, while Mario and Luigi would steer his body. The team further developed on the idea of Mario and Luigi being inside his body to be able to better utilize Bowser as a character, with his personality and behavior shining through. With this in mind, the team put extra effort to make sure Bowser didn't take on the form of a full-blown ally for the plumbing duo, making sure to maintain his role as the primary rival of the series, but also ensuring that his goals aligned with those of the Mario brothers. According to Kubota, There wouldn't be much of a plot if Mario and Bowser had different goals. The first idea was to have Mario and the rest use Bowser like a tank. The story about being sucked inside his body came as an end result of trying to figure out how to use Bowser as a character.
Did you know? The original Mario Party might have been planned to work with the Nintendo 64 disk drive. Booting up the North American version of the game while the disk drive is attached will lead to a blank screen, and booting up the Japanese and PAL versions of the game while the disk drive is attached will lead to an error screen. Two other games that fail to load under the same circumstances are F-Zero X and Ocarina of Time, both of which had 64DD expansions planned, with F-Zero's even seeing a release in Japan. Mario Party 2 actually started out as a 64DD project, and it's speculated that Mario Party 2 may have begun as an expansion of Mario Party for the disk drive. This idea is also supported by Mario Party 1 and 2 sharing nearly 20 of the same minigames and using the same playable characters with additional costumes. Mario Party 8 contains 3 unused minigames. The games have no explanations or English translations and can only be played by replacing the files of other minigames with the unused files. The games include Hammer D Pokari, where players have to swing the Wii remote horizontally to hit their opponents with a hammer, Guru Kata Duke, where players spin the remote in clockwise circles to roll up a length of ribbon, and Ochiruna Rodeo, a dual minigame where 2 players have to tilt the Wii remote to stay on top of a mechanical bull. What's interesting about these is that 2 minigames with striking similarities to Guru Kataduke and Ochiruna Rodeo appeared in Wii Party U, which had the same director as Mario Party 8.
Did you know? Early on in Mario 3's development, the game was planned to use a top-down perspective. Co-director Takashi Tezuka wanted to change the viewing angle as an experiment, but this also altered how vertical depth was perceived in the game. The angle was changed back to a side view during development, but relics of the top-down period can still be found in the game. The checkered floor at the game's title screen is one example given by Nintendo's developers. Many other concepts were ultimately cut or altered during development, however. While brainstorming new power-ups for the game, the designers considered adding a suit that would turn Mario into a centaur, but they scrapped it in favor of the Tanuki suit. Another change is that at one point during development, Mario was planned to face the direction he walked in at the map screen. This is a feature that wouldn't be implemented until the release of Super Mario World. Mario 3 also has leftover data for additional types of bonus games. The game contains several different variations on a dice rolling game, with win conditions based on rolling either an even or odd number, and there are also sprites for a Hammer Brother and Koopa Troopa as hosts. Super Mario Bros. 3 was eventually ported to the Game Boy Advance as part of the Super Mario Advance series. This version took advantage of the handheld's features and included 30 additional levels available via the e-reader peripheral. In order to unlock the levels, players would need a copy of the game, an e-reader, the corresponding card for the level they wanted to play, 2 GBA systems, and a link cable. The e-reader was never released in Europe, and the only 10 level cards were released in North America before the e-reader was discontinued due to low popularity. This meant 20 levels were completely inaccessible in the international version of Mario 3. When the GBA version of Mario 3 was re-released on the Wii U Virtual Console, all of the e-reader levels were included by default. If the player hits a muncher with Raccoon Mario's tail, it'll turn into a block. This trick was removed in the Super Mario Advance port, however. While working on the game, designer Hideki Kono struggled with the mechanics of the Micro Goombas, tiny enemies who would cling to Mario and drag him down when he jumped. Kono tried to make it work by increasing Mario's weight, but the result didn't feel quite right and was rejected. Miyamoto ultimately solved the problem by suggesting they simply place an invisible block above Mario's head, which he would bump into when he tried to jump.
New Super Mario Bros. Was also influenced by another series of older Mario games that were ported to the Game Boy Advance. The game was originally conceived as the 5th title in the Super Mario Advance series. The Mario Advance games were released from 2001 to 2003 and took the form of enhanced ports of older games in the series. After the release of Super Mario Advance 4, many fans wondered if there would be a 5th Advance game. With the release of the Nintendo DS, the timing seemed just right to make this new entry. The team decided to go ahead with the project, but make it a brand new title with unique branding, rather than another port. The trailer for the game shown at E3 2005 65 used music that never appeared anywhere in the game. This music was originally intended to be the overworld theme, but it was scrapped sometime during development, possibly to make room for Kondo's idea. Many other elements were scrapped during the making of the game. It seems that at least 2 of the game's 8 worlds were originally going to have different themes to those found in the final game. Images can be found in the game's files that suggest that World 4 was going to be a prehistoric world, and World 6 was going to be themed around machinery. In the final version, these worlds were adapted into a forest and mountain world respectively, though it's unclear why these changes were made. Larger variations of Wiggler and Swooper enemies can be found in the game's files. These larger enemies were tied into an interesting gameplay mechanic, as they were simply normal enemies that had eaten a super mushroom. Eventually though, this idea was also scrapped. The only remnant of this idea left in the game is the Mega Goomba that appears as the boss of World 4. This may have been the inspiration for the act of growing enemies with super mushrooms in Super Mario Maker.
New Super Mario Bros. On DS was originally supposed to have 2-player co-op. A few screenshots can be seen in an issue of Nintendo Power printed about 6 months before the game hit store shelves. The magazine says, New Super Mario Bros. Features a 2-player co-op mode, a first for the series. Not content simply to keep Luigi out of the limelight, Mario now uses his brother as a human shield. Maybe next time Luigi should leave his hotshot sibling to rot in the haunted mansion. Well, that's pretty much what happened, since co-op ended up getting cut and replaced with a small versus mode with only 5 stages. You can play single player as Luigi, but he has the exact same physics as Mario, so it's just a cosmetic difference. The gaming press reported seeing an early build where Bowser was playable as well, possibly as a reward for beating the game, but it didn't make it into the final game. The idea for full-on co-op eventually made its way into New Super Mario Bros. Wii, but instead of just 2 or 3 characters, it had 4. Regardless, all 4 characters controlled identically and didn't have unique physics or abilities. Other characters like Wario and Waluigi were considered, but fans would have expected them to have special skills, and Nintendo didn't want to do that. According to Miyamoto, Mario and Luigi are the same as always, of course, and suggestions for the other 2 characters included Wario and Waluigi, Toad, and Princess Peach. The thing is that with Wario, we need to have a fart attack, Peach would have to be able to fly with her skirt, and so on. With this game, we wanted every character to play the same way. Okay, Miyamoto, we suppose that does keep everyone on a more even playing field, but come on, it ain't esports, it's a party game. Peach flying and Wario farting would have been way better than 2 Toads.
During the development of Mario Tennis for the Nintendo 64, the designers at Camelot came up with an idea for a new character tentatively named Waluigi to serve as a rival counterpart to Princess Peach in the same vein as Wario and Waluigi. However, this idea was shot down by Shigeru Miyamoto. In an interview with Kotaku, Punch-Out Wii's producer Kensuke Tanabe revealed that he originally wanted to include Princess Peach as a guest character. However, she was dropped due to the possible negative reaction of violence against women. The first game to focus solely on Peach was Super Princess Peach for the DS. Super Princess Peach has several unused objects and enemies that appear to be heavily inspired by Yoshi's Island. These include rolling chomp blocks, 2 types of boos, and sprites of Goonies taken straight from Super Mario Advance 3. There's also 2 unused types of Goombas that seem to be based on the glad and calm emotions. Also present in the data, but not used in the final, are the 7 Koopalings. Only their art exists, but they're fully animated and would likely have been bosses. There's also a total of 11 stages not used in the final game. They include a test stage with warp pipes leading to other unused stages, a level with a pair of doors and a floor that freezes when the sad vibe is used, a stage full of blocks, enemies, and coins that sends the player to World 0 when completed, and a level containing so many sad Goombas that it causes the game to lag and the graphics to glitch out.
Luigi's Mansion was originally intended for release on the Nintendo 64, but the project would have taken a very different form. Neither Luigi nor the mansion were planned to appear in the game initially. The game's outline had Mario as the star, and several locations from houses to apartment complexes were considered. One of the more interesting ideas for settings was a dollhouse. As time went on, the project was shifted to the GameCube, and it was around this time Nintendo gave the concept a fresh start and gave Luigi the starring role. Eventually, the team hit upon the idea of using a European-style mansion, which could also be found in older buildings in the United States. However, before this final setting was decided upon, the team had considered using a Japanese-style building or even a ninja mansion. A possible relic of the game's N64 origins can be found in its data, a Star Collection sound effect from Super Mario 64. Luigi's Mansion also contains the elusive Totaka's Song. Totaka's Song is a 19-note melody by Nintendo sound designer Kazumi Totaka, and it's often hidden in his games. While Totaka's Song can be heard in the control sub-screen of Luigi's Mansion, it was originally going to appear during the encounter with Melody Pianissima as well. There are files in the game's code that have her play a jaunty rendition of the theme. Luigi's Mansion was actually tested to run in 3D, but this version was scrapped. Ex-Nintendo president Satoru Iwata spoke about their tests, saying, "Nintendo GameCube could display 3D images if you attached a special LCD, but that special liquid crystal display was really expensive back then. We couldn't have done it without selling it for a price far above that of the Nintendo GameCube itself. We already had a game for it though, Luigi's Mansion." The game's relationship with 3D would continue. While developing the Nintendo 3DS, developers used Luigi's Mansion to test the system's hardware. These tests essentially began the production of Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon.
At one of the first development meetings for Luigi's Mansion 2, one of the devs pulled out a marker and drew a you-know-what on the whiteboard. The game was being made by Canadian studio Next Level Games, with Nintendo's Japanese devs overseeing their work. They went to Nintendo and pitched the idea of making Luigi's Mansion 2 more of a detective game. They also did some experimenting with Luigi's Mansion as a clone of Gauntlet, the classic top-down dungeon crawler. But Miyamoto was watching a lot of TV dramas at the time, so he suggested they follow the template of the original game, but in a more episodic format. The devs ended up watching a lot of Mr. Bean and essentially molded the game's humor and personality around it, with Luigi as the hapless fool and reluctant hero. In the final game, Luigi can shine the dark light device to break illusions and see invisible objects. But the original idea was much more ambitious and would have divided the game into two separate realities, the normal world and the spirit world. The idea was inspired by the Dark World from Zelda: A Link to the Past, as well as Dark Aether from Metroid Prime 2. So there'd be a spirit world basically hiding behind every room in Luigi's Mansion 2, but the dark light device proved quicker and easier, so that's what they ultimately went with instead. Aspirations for multiplayer were aggressive, with Miyamoto saying he wanted fans playing it more than they played multiplayer Mario Kart. One mode was originally going to be called Tower of Terror, but Disney already had the name copyrighted for their theme park ride, so they changed it to Scarescraper. Or at least, that's what it's called in the American version. In the UK version, it's called Thrill Tower. There was going to be another mode within Scarescraper focused on killing rats called the Pest Floor, but Miyamoto didn't like it, so he cut the Pest Floor in a single meeting. There was another multiplayer mode called Haunt and Seek that programmer Gary Shaw told us they spent a lot of time on, but unfortunately it ended up getting cut. Gameplay was basically online Pac-Man, where one player's Luigi collects keys and 3 others are ghosts who can fly through walls. Instead of a top-down view like Pac-Man though, it would use standard 3D camera angles, and there was a unique mansion instead of the traditional Pac-Man stage. Ghosts could steal keys and scare Luigi, while Luigi could stun them with his flashlight and suck them up with the poltergust. After Haunt and Seek got scrapped, a simplified version made its way to Nintendo Land as a minigame called Luigi's Ghost Mansion. One aspect of the game that saw a lot of cuts and reworks was its bosses. In an Iwata Asks interview back in 2013, director Bryce Holiday mentioned that the Haunted Tower stage wasn't always planned to have a stairway boss. It was originally going to have a plant-based boss that tied into the level's botanical theme, but Miyamoto thought that it was too ordinary and upended the tea table. That's kind of Miyamoto's thing. If he doesn't like how a game's progressing, he'll just tell devs to start over, a metaphorical table flip. So instead of a plant, Miyamoto suggests that they make a boss out of the stairs. So they did. In another interview with IGN, Holiday said Miyamoto's tea table upending went even further than this. At one point, he threw out all the bosses of the game and made us start over. From our angle, that was kind of a tea table flip. Thankfully, this was still early days, and the team hadn't started modeling most of the bosses yet. They'd only made one, and the rest were just concepts. Miyamoto felt that the bosses should be unmistakably Luigi's Mansion in the player's eyes, so anything cliché or ordinary simply wouldn't do. Some bosses got tossed out multiple times, like the icy secret mine boss, which got tossed out about 4 times before the final design was made. Gary Shaw told us about one of these unused boss concepts, which was a mirror-based boss he said the team worked on for months. The player would have seen the boss through a mirror, but there was some asymmetry between reality and the reflection, and the player would have to exploit those differences to beat the boss. Gary couldn't remember the exact way you defeat the boss, but he thinks that you'd beat it by tricking it into falling off a cliff.
It was a clever, interesting idea, but in the end it just didn't work.
Did you also know that Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green were originally made to appeal to girls? Or that you could originally fish in the Water Temple boss room in Ocarina of Time? For more on those, check out the videos on screen. If you liked this video, give it a like and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.